My name is Marcus Chen, and today I'm going to tell you about the night God spoke words that shattered every fear I had about the future, words that revealed He was already in the tomorrow I was terrified to face. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. If this story speaks to you, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Share this with someone who's afraid of what's coming, and down in the comments, tell me what tomorrow frightens you the most. Your story matters, and I'd love to pray for you. I was 35 years old when fear of the future became my constant companion. Not the healthy kind of planning or preparation, the paralyzing kind that made every decision feel like it could lead to disaster. I worked as an architect in Chicago, and on paper my life looked stable. Good job, decent apartment, a few close friends. But inside, I was terrified. Terrified of making the wrong career move, terrified of financial collapse, terrified of ending up alone, terrified of a future I couldn't see or control. Every news headline about economic downturns sent me spiraling. Every story about someone losing everything made me question my own security. Every birthday reminded me I was getting older without the life I thought I'd have by now. No wife, no kids, no house with a white picket fence. My parents had immigrated from Taiwan when I was 5, working brutal hours to give me opportunities they never had. They'd sacrificed everything for my future, and here I was, paralyzed by fear of that same future, unable to move forward because I was too afraid of making the wrong choice. I'd been dating a woman named Sarah for 2 years. She was kind, intelligent, and patient with my anxieties. But lately, she'd been dropping hints about moving forward, about marriage, about building a life together, and I was terrified. What if I proposed and it was a mistake? What if we got married and grew apart? What if I couldn't provide for a family? What if I failed her the way I felt like I was failing at everything else? One Sunday evening, Sarah and I had dinner at her apartment. She'd cooked my favorite meal, and I knew something was coming. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said, and my stomach dropped. "Okay, I love you, I really do. But I need to know, do you see a future with me? Because I'm 33 years old, and I want a family. I want a partner who's ready to build something together. And I don't know if that's you." I stared at my plate, feeling panic rising in my chest. "I do see a future with you, I need more time to be sure." "You've been saying that for months. How much more time do you need?" "I don't know. What if we make this huge commitment and it's the wrong choice? What if we end up unhappy? What if—" "Marcus, you can't what if your way through life. At some point you have to take a leap of faith." "I know, I think maybe you need to figure out what you really want. Because I can't keep waiting for you to stop being afraid of tomorrow." After I left her apartment, I drove around the city for hours, my mind racing. Sarah was right. I'd been paralyzed by fear for so long that I couldn't move forward with anything. Not just the relationship, but my career, my life, everything. I'd turned down a promotion at work because I was afraid of the added responsibility. I'd avoided investing money because I was terrified of losing it. I'd kept people at arm's length because I was scared of being hurt. Fear of tomorrow had become a prison. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning through every possible disaster that could happen. What if Sarah left me? What if I ended up alone? What if my career stagnated? What if I wasted my life being too afraid to really live it? At 2 in the morning, I got out of bed, got dressed, and drove to the small church I'd been attending sporadically for the past year. I didn't know why. I just needed to be somewhere other than my own head. The church was locked, but there was a small prayer garden behind it. I sat on a bench in the darkness, surrounded by silence and the distant sounds of the city. And I broke. "God, I'm so tired," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I'm so tired of being afraid. Afraid of making mistakes, afraid of the future, afraid of everything. I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to move forward when I can't see what's coming. I'm paralyzed, and I'm losing everything that matters because I'm too scared to choose, to commit, to just live." I put my head in my hands and let the tears come. I cried for the opportunities I'd missed, for the life I wasn't living, for the fear that had stolen so much from me. And then, in the quietest, most gentle way, I heard something that stopped my spiral completely. Not audibly, but with absolute clarity in my spirit. A voice so certain, so loving, so powerful, that it cut through every fearful thought. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. I froze. The words settled over me like a blanket, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something shift inside my chest. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. I'd been treating the future like this unknown, terrifying thing that could destroy me, but God was saying He was already there. He was already in the tomorrow I feared. It wasn't unknown to Him. It wasn't uncertain to Him. It was already in His hands. But God, I whispered, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm making the right choices. I don't know if... And then I heard it again, even clearer this time. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. Trust me. I sat on that bench for a long time, just breathing, just letting those words sink into the deepest parts of my fear. God wasn't asking me to see the future. He wasn't asking me to know how everything would work out. He was asking me to trust that He was already there, already holding it, already in control. When I finally stood to leave, I felt different. The fear wasn't gone, not completely, but it didn't have the same grip on me. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like I could breathe. I drove home as the sun was starting to rise, and I pulled out my Bible, the one my mom had given me years ago that I rarely opened. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I flipped through until I landed on Matthew 6:34. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. I'd read that verse before, but it had always felt impossible. How could I not worry about tomorrow? But now, with God's words fresh in my spirit, I understood it differently. I didn't have to worry about tomorrow because God was already there. He wasn't waiting to see what would happen. He already knew. He already held it. It was already in His hands. I opened my journal, something my therapist had suggested I start keeping, and wrote at the top of a new page, "The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands." Underneath, I started writing out all my fears about the future. Fear of proposing to Sarah and it being wrong. Fear of staying in my job and missing better opportunities. Fear of leaving my job and failing. Fear of financial disaster. Fear of ending up alone. Fear of disappointing my parents. Fear of wasting my life. The list went on for 2 pages. And then next to each fear I wrote, "Already in God's hands." It felt almost too simple. But something about writing it, about declaring it, about choosing to believe it, it started to loosen the grip fear had on me. That morning, I called in sick to work. I needed a day to process what had just happened, to sit with these words God had spoken, to figure out what they meant for my life. I went for a long walk along the lake, and for the first time in months, I wasn't consumed by anxious thoughts about the future. I was just present. Watching the water, feeling the wind, breathing. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Are you okay? You seemed really upset last night." I stared at the message, feeling the familiar fear trying to creep back in. What should I say? What if I said the wrong thing? What if... But then I remembered, the tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. I typed back, "Can we talk tonight? I have some things I want to say." "Okay, come over around 7? I'll be there." I spent the rest of the day praying, journaling, and just sitting with what God had spoken to me. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say to Sarah or what choices I needed to make about my career. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't keep living in fear of tomorrow, because God was already there. And if He was already there holding it, in control of it, then I could trust Him with it. That evening, I drove to Sarah's apartment with my heart pounding, but my mind clearer than it had been in months. I didn't know exactly how this conversation would go, but I knew I couldn't keep living paralyzed by what-ifs. Sarah opened the door, and I could see the worry in her eyes. "Hey, come in." We sat on her couch, and I took a deep breath. "I need to tell you what happened last night. After I left here, I went to the church, and I had this moment where I just broke. I've been so paralyzed by fear of the future that I've been unable to move forward with anything, including us." She nodded, listening. "But something happened. I heard God speak to me. He told me that the tomorrow I'm so afraid of is already in his hands, and I realized I've been treating the future like this terrifying unknown that could destroy everything. But God's already there. He already sees it. He already holds it." "What does that mean for us?" Sarah asked quietly. "It means I've been unfair to you. I've been so focused on all the ways things could go wrong that I haven't been able to see all the ways they could go right. And I'm sorry. I don't have all the answers, and I'm still figuring out how to trust God with the future instead of being terrified of it. But I know I don't want to lose you because I'm too afraid to take a step forward." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Marcus, I don't need you to have everything figured out. I just need to know you're willing to try, that you're willing to choose me, choose us, even though you can't see exactly how it'll all work out. I am. I want to choose you. I want to build a future with you. And I'm learning that faith means taking steps forward even when I can't see the whole path." She reached for my hand. That's all I needed to hear. We talked for hours that night, about our fears, our hopes, our dreams. And for the first time, I wasn't consumed by anxiety about what could go wrong. I was focused on what I wanted to build, on the life I wanted to create with her. It wasn't perfect. My fear didn't magically disappear, but something had fundamentally shifted. I'd heard God's voice, and I knew he was already in the tomorrow that had terrified me for so long, and that changed everything. As I drove home that night, I thought about those words again. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. It was the truth I'd been missing my whole life, the truth that would transform everything if I could learn to really believe it, to really live it. God wasn't waiting to see what would happen tomorrow. He was already there, and I could trust him with it. The morning after my conversation with Sarah, I woke up feeling different, not completely free from fear, but aware of it in a new way. Every time anxiety about the future tried to creep in, I heard those words. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. I made coffee and sat by my window overlooking the city. Chicago was waking up, people rushing to work, cars honking, the relentless pace of life moving forward whether I was ready or not. For years, that thought had terrified me. Life moving forward, time passing, opportunities closing. But this morning, it felt different. God was already in that forward momentum. He was already in the days and weeks and years ahead. I pulled out my journal and wrote, "I don't have to see the whole staircase to take the first step. God is already at the top, at the bottom, and on every step in between." At work that day, my boss called me into his office. My heart immediately started racing, the old fear response kicking in. What had I done wrong? Was I being fired? Was this the disaster I'd been dreading? But I caught myself. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. I took a breath and walked into his office. "Marcus, sit down. I wanted to talk to you about something." "Here it comes," my fear whispered, but I pushed it aside. "You remember that promotion I offered you 6 months ago?" I nodded, the one I turned down because I was too afraid of the responsibility. "I'm offering it to you again, but this is the last time. I need someone to lead the new Sustainable Architecture division, and you're the most qualified person on our team. But I need an answer by Friday." My mind immediately went to all the reasons to say no. What if I failed? What if I wasn't ready? What if I took on too much and couldn't handle it? But then I thought about Sarah, about the conversation we'd had, about choosing to move forward even when I couldn't see the whole path. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Why do you think I'm the right person for this? Because you're brilliant, Marcus. You're detail-oriented, creative, and your designs are some of the best I've seen. The only thing holding you back is your own fear, but I believe in you, even if you don't believe in yourself yet. After I left his office, I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen, not seeing anything. This was exactly the kind of decision that had paralyzed me for years. A major choice that could change my career trajectory, my life. I texted Sarah. Boss offered me the promotion again. Deadline Friday. Freaking out a little. She texted back immediately. What does your gut tell you? That I want it, but I'm scared. Of what specifically? I thought about it. Of failing, of disappointing people, of not being good enough. Those are fears about tomorrow. What did God tell you about tomorrow? I smiled. She got it, that it's already in his hands. So maybe the question isn't what if I fail? Maybe it's, do I trust that God's already in that tomorrow, whether I succeed or fail? I stared at her message for a long time. She was right. My fear wasn't really about the job. It was about not trusting God with the outcomes. That evening, I met with my friend Kevin for dinner. We'd known each other since college, and he was one of the few people I could be completely honest with. I heard God speak to me, I told him over Korean BBQ. Like actually speak, not audibly but clearly. Kevin set down his chopsticks. What did he say? He said the tomorrow that frightens me is already in his hands. Damn, that's powerful. I know, but I don't know how to live it out. Like, I know it's true intellectually, but practically, I still want to control everything, plan for every contingency, protect myself from every possible disaster. Kevin nodded. You remember when I started my business 3 years ago? Yeah, I was terrified. Absolutely terrified. I had no idea if it would work, if I'd lose everything, if I was making a huge mistake. But I had this moment where I realized I could spend my whole life playing it safe and always wonder what could have been. Or I could take a risk and trust that God would be with me no matter what happened. And it was hard. Some days I still wonder if I made the right choice. But I've grown more in these 3 years than in the entire decade before. Not because everything went perfectly, it didn't, but because I learned to trust God in the uncertainty instead of being paralyzed by it. How did you do it? How did you learn to trust? Practice. Every day, every decision, I had to choose. Fear or faith, control or trust. It got easier over time, but it's still a choice I make. After dinner, I walked along the river thinking about what Kevin said. Practice, daily choices, fear or faith. The next morning, I woke up with a decision already forming. I was going to say yes to the promotion, not because I had it all figured out, not because I was confident I wouldn't fail, but because I was choosing to trust that God was already in that tomorrow. I called my boss and told him I'd accept the position. My hands were shaking as I hung up, but I also felt something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. Actual, genuine excitement about the future instead of just dread. That weekend, Sarah and I drove to visit my parents in the suburbs. They'd been asking to see her more often, dropping hints about grandchildren, making my mother's famous dumplings every time we visited, as if good food could speed up my decision-making. Sitting around their dinner table, my dad asked his usual question. So, Marcus, how is work? Actually, I got a promotion. I'm going to be leading a new division. My mother's face lit up. Marcus, this is wonderful. We're so proud. My dad nodded approvingly. See, all your hard work is paying off. Your mother and I, we worked so hard so you could have these opportunities. I felt the familiar weight of their sacrifice, the pressure of their expectations. But this time, instead of letting it fuel my fear of disappointing them, I chose to see it differently. Dad, can I ask you something? When you and Mum came to America, you didn't know what would happen. How did you do it? How did you move forward without knowing if it would work out? My dad was quiet for a moment. We had no choice. We had to believe it would be okay. We had to trust. But weren't you afraid? Of course. Terrified. But fear cannot stop you from living. You must move forward anyway. My mum reached across the table and took my hand. Marcus, we worry about you. You are so smart, so talented, but you are always so afraid. afraid to make mistake, afraid to fail. But life is not about never falling down. Life is about getting back up. Later, as Sarah and I drove back to the city, she said, "Your parents are wise." Yeah, I just wish I'd listened to them years ago. You're listening now. That's what matters. That night I couldn't sleep, not from anxiety this time, but from a restless energy. Something was shifting inside me. The fear was still there, but it wasn't in control anymore. I got out of bed and opened my Bible. I'd been reading it more since that night in the prayer garden, actually trying to understand it, instead of just skimming for comfort verses. I found myself in Jeremiah 29:11. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." God had plans, not just vague hopes or possibilities, but actual plans. And they were good plans. Plans for my future, the future I'd been so afraid of. I wrote in my journal, what if the tomorrow I'm afraid of is actually the tomorrow God has been preparing for me? What if my fear is keeping me from the very future He wants to give me? The thought was revolutionary. I'd been treating the future as an enemy, something to be feared and protected against. But what if it was actually a gift? What if God had good things waiting in that tomorrow, and my fear was the only thing keeping me from them? On Monday, I started my new role. The first day was overwhelming. New responsibilities, new team members, new challenges. Every few hours I felt panic trying to creep in. What if I couldn't do this? What if I'd made a mistake? But each time, I stopped and reminded myself, the tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. One of my new team members, a young designer named Alicia, came to me with a problem about a client's project. The old Marcus would have panicked, worried about making the wrong call, spent hours agonizing over the decision. Instead, I listened to her concern, asked a few questions, and made a decision based on what seemed right. Not perfect, not guaranteed to work, just the best choice I could make with the information I had. "Thanks, Marcus," Alicia said. "I appreciate you being so decisive." Decisive. No one had ever called me that before. That evening, Sarah came over to my apartment. I'd been thinking about something all week, and I knew I needed to talk to her about it. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I started, "about us, about the future, about everything." She looked nervous. "Okay, I'm not ready to propose yet, but I want to be clear. It's not because I don't want to marry you. It's because I want to do it right. I want to be emotionally healthy enough to be a good husband. And I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it. I'm learning to trust God with the future instead of being paralyzed by fear of it." Sarah's eyes got teary. "Marcus, that's the most honest you've ever been with me. I know I've been frustrating to date, all my hesitation, my inability to commit, but I want you to know I'm choosing you. I'm choosing us. I'm just also choosing to do the work I need to do so I can show up as the man you deserve." She kissed me then, and I felt a peace I'd never experienced before. Not because I had everything figured out, but because I was finally being honest about where I was and where I wanted to go. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing patterns. Every time I chose trust over fear, things worked out better than when I let fear drive my decisions. Not because everything went perfectly, but because I was actually living instead of just surviving. I made mistakes at work. Some of my decisions didn't pan out the way I hoped. But instead of spiraling into fear about future failures, I learned from them and moved forward. I started seeing a Christian counselor, someone who could help me work through the roots of my fear and anxiety. It wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. And slowly, day by day, choice by choice, I was learning what it meant to trust that God was already in my tomorrow. The fear didn't disappear, but it didn't control me anymore. Because I knew something now that I hadn't known before. The tomorrow that frightens me is already in God's hands. And His hands are trustworthy. 3 months into my new position, I was starting to find my rhythm. The fear still came, especially when facing big decisions. But I'd developed a practice. Pause, breathe, remember God's words, choose trust. One Tuesday morning, my boss called an emergency meeting. The company was restructuring. Budget cuts were coming. Some positions would be eliminated. I felt the old familiar panic start to rise. What if they cut my division? What if this promotion was short-lived? What if I ended up unemployed? But I caught myself before the spiral could take over. I went to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall and prayed. God, I'm scared. This feels like the disaster I've been waiting for. But you told me that the tomorrow that frightens me is already in your hands. So I'm choosing to trust you, even with this, even now. The meeting was tense. Our CEO explained the situation: market downturn, client contracts falling through, need to trim expenses. My heart pounded as he outlined which departments would be affected. When he got to my division, I held my breath. The Sustainable Architecture division is actually one of our bright spots. We're seeing increased demand in this area, so we'll be maintaining current staffing and even potentially expanding in the next quarter. I exhaled slowly. Not eliminated, potentially expanding. After the meeting, Alicia approached me. "Hey, can we talk?" We went to a coffee shop across the street. She looked worried. "My boyfriend proposed last weekend," she said. "That's great. Congratulations." "Thanks. But he got a job offer in Seattle. He wants us to move after we get married." "And you're not sure?" "I love my job here. I love this city. But I love him too. I don't know how to choose between them." I recognized that fear immediately. The fear of making the wrong choice, of closing one door and regretting it forever. "Can I tell you something?" I said. "A few months ago, I was completely paralyzed by fear of the future. I turned down this promotion the first time because I was so afraid of failing. I almost lost my girlfriend because I couldn't commit to a future I couldn't see perfectly. What changed? I had this moment where I heard God tell me that the tomorrow I was so afraid of was already in His hands. And I realized I'd been treating the future like this terrifying unknown that could destroy me, but God's already there. He already sees it. He's already holding it." Alicia was quiet, processing. "I'm not saying your decision is easy," I continued, "but I am saying that fear of tomorrow doesn't have to be what makes the choice for you. You can trust that God's already in that tomorrow, whether you stay here or move to Seattle." How do I know which choice is right? I don't think there's always one perfect right choice. I think there are often multiple good paths, and God can work with whichever one you choose. The question isn't which choice guarantees a perfect future. The question is, which choice aligns with who I am and what I value, and can I trust God to be with me in it? She nodded slowly. "That actually helps. Thank you." After she left, I sat there thinking about how much I'd changed in just a few months. I was giving advice about trusting God with the future. Me, the guy who'd been paralyzed by fear for years. That weekend, Sarah and I went hiking in the Indiana dunes. It was her idea. She'd been gently pushing me to try new things, to stop playing it safe all the time. Halfway up a particularly steep trail, I had to stop to catch my breath. Sarah turned back, smiling. "You okay?" "Just out of shape," I gasped. "Or just not used to doing hard things." I laughed. She wasn't wrong. When we reached the top and looked out over Lake Michigan, Sarah took my hand. "I'm proud of you, you know. The changes you've been making. The work you're doing on yourself. I still have a long way to go." "We all do. But you're actually moving forward now, instead of being frozen." That evening, as we drove back to Chicago, my phone rang. It was my mom. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. Your father had chest pains today. We went to hospital. They are running tests." My heart stopped. "Is he okay? What did they say?" "They don't know yet. Maybe heart attack, maybe something else. We find out tomorrow." Tomorrow. That word that used to send me into spirals of catastrophic thinking. "I'm coming to the hospital right now." No. We are home now. Father is resting. Come tomorrow." After we hung up, I sat in Sarah's car in silence, gripping the steering wheel. "Marcus," Sarah said gently, "what's wrong?" I told her about my dad, and immediately my mind went to worst-case scenarios. What if it was serious? What if he needed surgery? What if something went wrong? What if I lost him? "Hey," Sarah said, touching my arm. "Breathe, one step at a time. I'm trying. But this is my dad. What if the tomorrow that frightens you is already in God's hands?" Remember, I closed my eyes. She was right. God knew what those test results would show. He knew what tomorrow held. This terrifying unknown I was facing, God was already there. "Can we pray?" I asked. Right there in the car, Sarah prayed for my father, for peace, for trust, for God's presence in whatever tomorrow brought. That night I barely slept, but instead of letting my mind run through disaster scenarios, I kept praying, kept reminding myself that God was already in tomorrow, kept choosing trust over fear. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. My dad was sitting at the kitchen table, looking tired but okay. "Dad, how are you feeling?" "Better. We go back to hospital this afternoon for results." My mom made tea, her hands shaking slightly. I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear I'd carried for so long. "Mom, can we pray together before you go?" She looked surprised. I'd never been the one to initiate prayer before, but she nodded. I prayed in English while she whispered in Mandarin, and my dad sat quietly with his eyes closed. I prayed for healing, for peace, for trust, and I prayed that whatever the results showed, we would remember that God was already there. That afternoon, I went with them to the hospital. Sitting in that waiting room, I felt the fear trying to take over, but I kept coming back to those words. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. Finally, the doctor called us in. "Mr. Jen, the good news is you didn't have a heart attack. You had an episode of angina, which is chest pain caused by reduced blood flow to the heart. With medication and some lifestyle changes, this is very manageable." The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. Not cancer, not a massive heart attack, something manageable. But as we drove home, I realized something. Even if the news had been worse, God would still have been in that tomorrow. Even if it had been the thing I feared most, He would still have been there, holding it, holding us. That was what trust meant. Not that nothing bad would ever happen, but that God was present in whatever happened. Over the next few weeks, I helped my parents adjust to my dad's new medications and dietary restrictions. My mum worried constantly, and I found myself in the strange position of being the one encouraging her to trust. "Mum, I know you're scared, but worrying about what might happen tomorrow doesn't help. We have to trust that God's taking care of Dad." She looked at me with surprise. "When did you become so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just learning that fear of tomorrow only steals peace from today." At work, things continued to evolve. The Sustainable Architecture Division was growing faster than expected. We landed several major clients, and I was leading a team of 12 now. One afternoon, Kevin stopped by my office. "Hey, I have a proposition for you." "What's up?" "I'm thinking about expanding my business. I need someone to design our new office space, something innovative, sustainable, impressive." "Interested." "Are you kidding?" "Of course. There's a catch. It's a huge project and I need it done in 3 months. Can you handle it alongside your regular work?" The old Marcus would have immediately said no. Too much, too risky. What if I couldn't deliver? But the new Marcus, the one learning to trust God with tomorrow, saw opportunity instead of just risk. "Let me talk to my boss about adjusting my schedule. But yeah, I want to do this." That evening, I told Sarah about Kevin's offer. "That's amazing, but 3 months is tight. Are you sure you can do it?" "Honestly, I don't know. But I'm learning that not knowing doesn't mean I should say no. It means I should trust that God will help me figure it out." She smiled. "Look at you, taking risks, choosing faith over fear." "Don't get too excited. I'm still terrified half the time." "But you're doing it anyway. That's courage." I thought about that. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite the fear. Over the next few weeks, I juggled my regular work with Kevin's project. It was intense, demanding, exhausting. There were nights I worked until 2 in the morning. Days I questioned if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. But something was different. Instead of the paralyzing fear I used to feel, I had this underlying confidence that God was with me in it. Even when it was hard, even when I was stressed, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. One particularly brutal week, I had a breakthrough moment. I was stuck on a design problem, frustrated and exhausted, when I remembered something my counselor had told me. When you're afraid of the future, you're trying to control outcomes, but when you trust God with the future, you can be present in the process. I stopped trying to force the solution and just sat with the problem, let myself be in the struggle instead of fearing where the struggle might lead. And the solution came, not because I'd pushed harder, but because I'd stopped letting fear drive me and started trusting the process. When I presented the design to Kevin, his face lit up. "Marcus, this is incredible. This is exactly what I envisioned but couldn't articulate. You captured it perfectly." Driving home that night, I felt something I rarely experienced, pride in my work. Not arrogant pride, but genuine satisfaction in doing something well. I called Sarah. I finished Kevin's project. And he loved it, like really loved it. "I'm so proud of you. See what happens when you don't let fear stop you." "Yeah, I'm starting to get that." Later that week, I met with my counselor. "I've noticed something," I told him. "The more I practice trusting God with tomorrow, the less power fear has over my decisions today." That's significant growth, Marcus. Can you think of a recent example? I told him about Kevin's project, about working with my dad's health scare, about supporting Alicia with her decision. What would old Marcus have done in those situations? Avoided them. Turned down the project, spiraled into catastrophic thinking about my dad, given Alicia advice based on fear rather than faith. And new Marcus showed up, did the hard thing, trusted that God was already in whatever tomorrow brought. My counselor smiled. That's transformation, not perfection, but real, measurable growth. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I'm learning that the future I feared was actually the future God was preparing me for." Every hard thing, every scary decision, every moment of uncertainty, God was there before me, already holding it, already working it out. My fear was just blocking me from seeing it. I thought about how far I'd come in just a few months. From paralyzed by fear to taking on major challenges, from avoiding commitment to actively working toward a future with Sarah, from seeing tomorrow as an enemy to seeing it as an invitation. And I knew this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges, more moments of fear, more opportunities to choose trust over terror. But now I had something I didn't have before. I had God's promise, spoken clearly in that prayer garden. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. And I was learning day by day, choice by choice, to actually believe it. 6 months after God spoke to me in that prayer garden, I faced a test that would challenge everything I'd been learning about trust. Sarah and I were having dinner at our favorite Thai restaurant when she brought up a topic we'd been dancing around for months. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about something serious." My heart started pounding, but I took a breath. "Okay, I got a job offer in New York. It's an incredible opportunity. VP of Marketing at a Fortune 500 company. Double my current salary. But it means moving in 3 months." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. New York, 3 months. This was the exact kind of future disruption that used to send me into panic spirals. Wow, that's huge. I haven't accepted yet, because of us, because I don't know what this means for us. What do you want it to mean? She looked at me with those honest eyes. "I want you to come with me, or I want us to do long distance and figure it out, or I want you to tell me not to go because you're going to propose and we're building a life here. I want clarity, Marcus. I need to know if we're in this together or if I should make this decision on my own." I sat there, feeling all the old fears trying to resurface. What if I moved to New York and it was a mistake? What if I stayed and lost her? What if I proposed and we weren't ready? What if? But then I heard it again, that gentle reminder. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. Can I have a week? I asked. Not to decide about us. I know I want to build a future with you, but to pray about it, to figure out what the right next step is. She nodded. 1 week. But Marcus, I need a real answer. Not more delays, not more maybes. A real answer. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, prayed, journaled, and wrestled with the decision. Moving to New York meant leaving my job, my family, my city, but staying might mean losing Sarah. At 2 in the morning, I found myself back at that prayer garden behind the church. God, I don't know what to do. I want to trust you with this, but it's so big. It affects everything. My career, my relationship, where I live, everything. I need you to show me what to do. I sat in the silence, waiting, and slowly I felt a peace settling over me. Not answers exactly, but a knowing that I didn't have to figure this all out tonight. That God was already in that tomorrow, whether it included New York or Chicago. The next day, I called Kevin. I need your advice. Sarah got a job offer in New York. She wants me to move with her. Do you want to move to New York? I don't know. I'm scared of leaving everything I know, but I'm more scared of losing her. Marcus, let me ask you something. When you think about your future, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where do you see yourself? I thought about it. With Sarah, married, maybe kids, building something together. Then your city is wherever she is. New York, Chicago, Timbuktu, doesn't matter. Home is where you build your life with the person you love. His words hit me hard. I'd been treating this like a choice between Sarah and stability, but maybe the real choice was between fear of change and trust in what God was building. That evening, I met with my parents. I needed their perspective, their wisdom. Sarah got a job offer in New York, I told them over dinner. She wants me to move with her. My mother's face fell. New York? But Marcus, your life is here. Your job, your family. I know, Mom, but what if my life is supposed to be with Sarah? My dad was quiet, thoughtful. When your mother and I left Taiwan, we left everything. Our families, our friends, everything we knew. It was terrifying, but it was right, because we were building our future together. How did you know it was right? We didn't know. We trusted. We chose each other, and we trusted God with the rest. My mom reached across the table. Marcus, we want you close. Of course we do, but we want you happy more. If Sarah is your future, then go. Build your life. We will visit. You will visit. Family is family, no matter the distance. I felt tears building. Thank you. I needed to hear that. That weekend, I did something I'd never done before. I made a list of all my fears about moving to New York, and next to each one, I wrote what I would do if that fear came true. Fear: I won't find a good job in New York. Response: I'll network, freelance, trust that God will provide. Fear: I'll miss my family too much. Response: I'll visit regularly, video call, trust that love transcends distance. Fear: Sarah and I will move there and then break up. Response: that would hurt, but I'd survive it. And I'd have still chosen love over fear. Looking at my list, I realized something profound. Every fear had a potential solution. Every worst-case scenario was survivable. I'd been treating these fears like they were death sentences, when really they were just challenges I could face if I had to. On Wednesday, I made an appointment with my boss. I need to talk to you about something. My girlfriend got a job offer in New York, and I'm considering moving with her. He leaned back in his chair. When? She needs to start in 3 months. Marcus, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't want to lose you. You've become invaluable to this team, but I also understand choosing love over career. Can I make you an offer? What kind of offer? Work remotely. Come into the office once a month for in-person meetings. We're moving toward more remote work anyway, and you've proven you can deliver quality work independently. The position is yours if you want it, in New York or anywhere else. I was stunned. Are you serious? Completely. You're too good at what you do to lose over geography. Walking out of his office, I felt like God had just removed one of my biggest obstacles. I didn't have to choose between my career and Sarah. I could have both. That evening I took Sarah to the lakefront. We walked along the water as the sun set, and I finally had clarity. "I have my answer," I said. She stopped walking, her face tense with anticipation. "I want to move to New York with you. My boss offered to let me work remotely so I can keep my job. And I want to do this, build a life with you, take this adventure together." Her eyes filled with tears. "Really? You're sure?" "I'm terrified, but I'm sure. Because the tomorrow that frightens me is already in God's hands, and I trust Him with it. I trust Him with us." She kissed me right there on the lakefront, and I felt a freedom I'd never experienced. I was choosing faith over fear, choosing love over safety, choosing to step into an unknown future because I trusted the God who was already there. "There's one more thing," I said. "I'm not ready to propose yet, but I want you to know that's where this is heading. I'm moving to New York because I see a future with you. I just need a little more time to be emotionally ready for that commitment." "I can work with that," she said, smiling through tears. "Thank you for being honest. Thank you for choosing us." Over the next few weeks, I prepared for the move. I told my team at work, started looking at apartments in New York, and began the process of packing up my life. One evening, Alicia stopped by my office. "I heard you're moving to New York." "Yeah, following my girlfriend." "That's brave. You inspired me, you know. I decided to move to Seattle with my fiancé." "You were right. God's already in that tomorrow. I can trust Him with it." After she left, I sat at my desk feeling grateful. My journey of learning to trust wasn't just changing my life. It was influencing others too. My counselor helped me process all the emotions that came with such a major life change. Fear, excitement, grief about leaving, hope about beginning. "I'm proud of you, Marcus," he said in our last session before the move. 6 months ago, you couldn't commit to dinner plans without spiraling. Now you're moving across the country for love. That's remarkable growth. I still get scared all the time. But you're not letting fear make your decisions anymore. That's the difference. The night before the move, my parents threw me a goodbye dinner. My mom cried. My dad gave me a rare hug, and they both told me they were proud of me. "You are becoming the man we always hoped you would be," my dad said. "Brave, strong, willing to take risks for love." Kevin and a few other friends came over to help me load the moving truck. As we packed boxes, Kevin pulled me aside. "You know what I admire about this? You're not just running to Sarah. You're running to a future you're choosing to believe in. That takes real courage. I learned it from watching you. You took the leap with your business. I'm just doing the same thing with my life." That night, sleeping in my empty apartment one last time, I thought about everything that had happened since that night in the prayer garden. How God had spoken, how I'd slowly learned to trust, how my entire life had transformed. I pulled out my journal and wrote, "Tomorrow I drive to New York. Tomorrow I start a new chapter. Tomorrow is unknown and a little scary, but God is already there. He's already in that apartment I haven't seen yet. He's already in the life Sarah and I will build together. He's already in the challenges and joys and struggles and victories. The tomorrow that frightens me is already in His hands." And that makes all the difference. The next morning I loaded the last few boxes into my car. Sarah was driving her own car, and we'd convoy to New York together. As I pulled away from my apartment building, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness about leaving, anxiety about the unknown, but also excitement, hope, trust. I texted Sarah. "Ready?" She texted back. "Ready? Let's go build our future." Indeed, as I drove out of Chicago, watching the skyline disappear in my rearview mirror, I thought about how terrified I used to be of moments like this, of change, of uncertainty, of futures I couldn't predict or control. But I wasn't that Marcus anymore. I was the Marcus who'd learned to trust, the Marcus who chose faith over fear, the Marcus who believed that God was already in the tomorrow that used to terrify him. New York was waiting. A new life was waiting, and I was ready to step into it. Not because I had it all figured out, not because I knew exactly how everything would work out, but because I knew the one who did. and his hands were trustworthy. New York hit me like a wall. The noise, the crowds, the pace, everything was overwhelming. Sarah and I found an apartment in Brooklyn, a small two-bedroom we could barely afford, even with both our salaries. The first month was brutal. I worked remotely from our cramped apartment while Sarah navigated her new high-pressure job. We were both exhausted, stressed, and adjusting to a city that felt hostile and impersonal compared to Chicago. One particularly hard day, I called Kevin. "I think I made a mistake. I'm not sure I belong here. Give it time. You've been there, 3 weeks? Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither is a new life. But what if it doesn't get better? What if I uprooted my entire life for nothing?" "Marcus, you didn't uproot your life for nothing. You did it for Sarah. You did it because you were choosing love over fear. Don't let a few hard weeks make you forget that." He was right. I was letting temporary difficulty make me question a decision I'd made with clarity and purpose. That evening, Sarah came home looking defeated. "Rough day?" I asked. "The worst. My boss is demanding, the team is competitive, and I feel like I'm drowning. I keep wondering if I made the right choice taking this job." We sat on our couch, both of us questioning our choices, both of us exhausted. "Want to know something?" I said. "I called Kevin today, freaking out about whether we made a mistake moving here." She laughed, but it was tired. "Great. We're both second-guessing everything. Or maybe we're just going through the hard part. The part where it's uncomfortable and new, and we haven't found our rhythm yet. When did you become the optimistic one?" "I'm not optimistic. I'm just trying to remember that God's already in this tomorrow, even when today is hard." Over the next few weeks, things slowly started to improve. I found a coffee shop nearby that became my regular workspace. Sarah started clicking with some colleagues at her job. We discovered our favorite spots in the neighborhood: a Thai place that reminded us of Chicago, a bookstore with a cat, a park where we could breathe. One Saturday, we were walking through Prospect Park when Sarah stopped suddenly. "Marcus, I need to tell you something." My heart rate spiked. "Okay. I think we should get a dog." I laughed with relief. "That's what you needed to tell me." "I'm serious. I think having a dog would help this place feel more like home. Give us something to care for together." The old Marcus would have listed all the reasons why now wasn't the right time. The logistics, the expense, the responsibility. But I thought about what she was really saying. She needed this place to feel like home. She needed us to build something here together. "Let's do it." Her face lit up. "Really? Really? Let's go meet some dogs." We spent that afternoon at an animal shelter in Brooklyn, and that's where we met Charlie, a 3-year-old rescue mutt with one floppy ear and the most soulful eyes I'd ever seen. "This one," Sarah said, and I knew she was right. We brought Charlie home that day, and something shifted. The apartment felt less like a temporary landing spot and more like a home we were building together. At work, my remote arrangement was working well. I flew back to Chicago once a month for meetings, which also gave me time to see my parents and friends. But I was surprised to find I didn't miss Chicago as much as I thought I would. One afternoon, I got a message from an architecture firm in Manhattan. They'd seen my work on Kevin's project and wanted to meet about potential collaboration. I met with them at their office in Midtown. The principal architect, a woman named Diana, showed me around their impressive space. "We're looking for someone to lead our residential sustainable design division. It would be full-time, in office, but the work would be cutting edge. Interested?" 6 months ago, an offer like this would have sent me into analysis paralysis. What if I left my current job and this didn't work out? What if I wasn't good enough? What if? But I'd learned something. Fear of the wrong choice kept me from making any choice, and staying paralyzed was worse than occasionally being wrong. "Can I think about it for a week?" "Of course. But Marcus, I want you to know, we don't make offers like this lightly. We've done our research. We believe you're the right person for this." That evening, I talked it through with Sarah. "It's an incredible opportunity," she said, "but it means giving up the flexibility of remote work." "I know, but it also means being part of something bigger, building something from the ground up here in New York. What does your gut tell you? I thought about it, that this is why I moved here, not just for you, but for opportunities like this, for a future I couldn't have had in Chicago. Then I think you have your answer. I prayed about it, talked to Kevin, and talked to my parents. Everyone said the same thing. This felt like the next right step. I accepted the position and gave notice at my Chicago job. It was bittersweet. They'd been good to me, especially letting me work remotely. But I knew it was time. My last day working remotely, I wrote a thank you email to my old boss. His response surprised me. "Marcus, when you first started here, you were talented but terrified of your own shadow. Watching you grow into someone who takes risks, who leads confidently, who chooses opportunity over fear, it's been inspiring. Go build something amazing in New York." Starting at the new firm felt like beginning my career all over again. New team, new expectations, new challenges. But this time, I wasn't paralyzed by fear of failure. I was energized by possibility. One of my first projects was designing a sustainable, affordable housing complex in Queens. It was ambitious, complex, and exactly the kind of challenge I used to avoid. Halfway through the design phase, we hit a major snag. The budget constraints were tighter than expected, and my original design wouldn't work. I stayed late at the office, frustrated and stuck. My new colleague, James, found me there at 9 at night. "Go home, Chen. The solution will come. But the presentation is in 3 days. And you'll figure it out, but not tonight when you're exhausted. Trust the process." Trust, that word again. I went home, walked Charlie, and sat on the couch with Sarah. I'm stuck on this project. Can't figure out how to make it work with the budget constraints. Want to talk through it? I explained the problem, and as I talked, something clicked. A solution I hadn't considered because I'd been too focused on my original vision. "That's it," I said, jumping up. "I've been trying to force my design to work instead of redesigning around the constraints." Sarah smiled. "Sometimes the limitations are what lead to the best solutions." I worked on the new design over the weekend, and when I presented it Monday, Diana was impressed. "This is better than your original concept. More innovative, more sustainable, more creative. Well done." After the meeting, Diana pulled me aside. "You're fitting in well here. I'm glad we took a chance on you. I'm glad I took a chance on myself." That spring, Sarah and I started talking seriously about marriage. Not in the vague future sense, but in the let's actually plan this sense. "I want to marry you," I told her one evening. "I'm ready. I've done the work on myself. I've built stability here. I'm not running from fear anymore. I want to choose you, choose us, choose this future we're building. Are you proposing?" "Not yet. I want to do it right. But I'm telling you it's coming. Soon." She kissed me. "I can wait for soon." I started planning. I called her father to ask for his blessing. I went ring shopping with Kevin when he visited New York. I thought about how I wanted to propose, what would be meaningful to both of us. But I also dealt with fear in new ways. Not fear of commitment anymore, but fear of not being enough, fear of disappointing her, fear of not being the husband she deserved. My counselor, I'd found a new one in New York, helped me work through it. "Marcus, you're never going to feel completely ready. Marriage isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing to grow together. What if I fail her? You probably will sometimes. All spouses do. But failing occasionally doesn't mean you're a failure. It means you're human." In June, I took Sarah back to Chicago for my parents' 40th anniversary party. The whole family was there, and I watched my parents dance together, still so clearly in love after all these years. "How did you do it?" I asked my dad. 40 years, all the challenges, all the changes, how did you make it work?" "We chose each other every day, even on hard days, even when we were angry or tired or struggling. We chose to stay, to work, to love. That's all marriage is, choosing each other again and again." That night I took Sarah to the prayer garden where God had first spoken to me. I'd planned an elaborate proposal, but standing there in that sacred spot, I kept it simple. "This is where my life changed," I told her. This is where I heard God tell me that the tomorrow I was so afraid of was already in his hands. And I realize now, you're part of that tomorrow he was holding. This future we're building together, this life we're creating, God was already here, already preparing it, already knowing. I got down on one knee. Sarah, I spent years being too afraid to choose, to commit, to step into an unknown future. But you've taught me that love is worth the risk. That faith means stepping forward even when you can't see the whole path. Will you marry me? She was crying and nodding before I even finished. Yes, yes, of course, yes. I slipped the ring on her finger, and we stood there in that prayer garden, holding each other, both of us crying happy tears. My mom took 1,000 pictures at the anniversary party when we announced our engagement. My dad shook my hand and then pulled me into a hug. I'm proud of you, son. You became a man who chooses love over fear. That's the most important thing. Flying back to New York with my fiancée, I thought about how far I'd come. From paralyzed by fear to engaged and building a life in a new city, from avoiding decisions to making bold choices. And all of it came back to that one truth God had spoken. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. I'd learned to believe it, to live it, to trust that God was always ahead of me. Already in the future, I feared, already holding it, already working it out. And that trust had transformed everything. Planning a wedding brought up fears I didn't know I had. Not about marrying Sarah, I was certain about that, but about everything that came with it, the logistics, the expectations, the pressure to make it perfect. Sarah wanted a small ceremony which relieved me, but even a small wedding required decisions, and each one felt weighted with significance. One evening, we were looking at venues when I started spiraling. What if we pick the wrong place and everyone's miserable? What if it rains? What if... Sarah closed the laptop. Marcus, stop, it's our wedding. As long as we end up married, everything else is just details. But I want it to be special for you. It will be special because I'm marrying you. The venue doesn't matter that much. Her perspective helped. I was making this about perfection when it should be about commitment, about choosing each other in front of the people we loved. At work, Diana asked me to pitch a major project to a potential client, a sustainable office complex in downtown Manhattan. It was the biggest opportunity I'd had since joining the firm. This could make your career here, she said, but it's also high risk. If we land it, great. If we don't, we've invested a lot of time for nothing. The old fear tried to creep in. What if I messed up the pitch? What if we didn't get it? But I caught myself. I'll do it, and I'll give it everything I've got. I spent 3 weeks preparing. Late nights, weekend work, refining every detail. Sarah was patient with my obsession, bringing me food when I forgot to eat, reminding me to come to bed at reasonable hours. The night before the pitch, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake running through my presentation, imagining every possible question, every way it could go wrong. At 3 a.m, Sarah rolled over. You're not sleeping. I can't. I keep thinking about tomorrow. She sat up. Marcus, listen to me. You've prepared. You've done the work. Now you have to trust that God's already in that meeting room tomorrow, already in the client's decision, already in whatever happens. I knew she was right, but knowing and feeling were different things. What if I freeze? What if I forget everything? Then you'll remember, or you'll improvise, or the client will still see your passion and talent. But worrying about it now doesn't change anything about tomorrow. I got out of bed and went to the living room. Charlie followed me, resting his head on my lap as I sat on the couch. I prayed. Not a desperate, fearful prayer, but an honest one. God, I'm scared. This matters to me, and I want to do well. But I'm choosing to trust that you're already in that room tomorrow, that whatever happens, you're with me in it. The peace that came wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. I went back to bed and actually slept. The pitch went better than I could have imagined. I was clear, confident, and when I did stumble over a question, I recovered smoothly. The clients asked thoughtful questions, seemed genuinely interested, and told us they'd have a decision within 2 weeks. Walking out of that building, I felt exhausted but proud. I'd done my best. Whatever happened now was out of my hands. A week later, we got the contract. The firm celebrated, and Diana pulled me aside. "That was exceptional work, Marcus. You're proving you belong at this level." That evening, Sarah and I celebrated with Kevin, who was visiting New York for business. "Look at you," Kevin said. "Remember when you couldn't commit to dinner plans? Now you're landing major contracts and planning a wedding. I still get scared, all the time. But you do it anyway. That's what matters." The wedding planning continued. We chose a small garden venue in upstate New York. Sarah's sister agreed to officiate. We kept the guest list to 40 people, just family and closest friends. But 2 months before the wedding, my mom called with difficult news. "Marcus, your father's health is getting worse. The doctors want him to have heart surgery. They say it cannot wait much longer." My stomach dropped. "When?" "Next month. We know this is close to your wedding. We will understand if you want to postpone." "No, we're not postponing. We'll move the wedding up, have it before Dad's surgery." After I hung up, I told Sarah. She didn't hesitate. "Let's do it. Let's get married next month instead." But we haven't finalized everything. The venue might not be available. We'd have to rush. "Marcus, your dad needs to be at our wedding. Everything else we can figure out." We called the venue. Miraculously, they had an opening in 4 weeks. We contacted our guests with the date change. Everyone understood. The rush timeline meant less time to obsess over details, which was actually a blessing. We focused on what mattered, committing to each other with our loved ones present. My parents flew in a week before the wedding. My dad looked frailer than I'd ever seen him, but he was determined to walk me down the aisle, to stand with me as I married Sarah. The night before the wedding, my dad and I sat on Sarah's parents' porch, just the two of us. "I'm proud of you, Marcus. Not just for this wedding, but for the man you've become. I learned from you, Dad. You and Mom showed me what commitment looks like. We also showed you what sacrifice looks like. We sacrificed so much for you to have opportunities. And I think that burden made you afraid of not living up to what we gave up for you." I'd never thought about it that way, but he was right. Your mother and I, we don't need you to be perfect. We need you to be happy, to live fully, to not waste your life being afraid of making mistakes. I'm trying, I'm learning. I know, and I see it. The way you moved to New York for love, the way you took risks with your career, the way you're choosing Sarah every day. That's what we wanted for you, to live bravely. The wedding day was perfect, not because everything went according to plan. The flowers were late, it drizzled during the ceremony, Sarah's nephew cried through the vows, but it was perfect because we were surrounded by love. When it came time for my dad to walk me to the altar, we'd decided both our fathers would walk us in together. I saw tears in his eyes. He squeezed my hand as we walked, and I felt the weight of his blessing, his pride, his love. Standing there with Sarah, saying vows in front of everyone we loved, I felt no fear, just certainty, just peace, just gratitude for a future I once would have been too afraid to choose. After the ceremony, during the reception, my counselor from Chicago, who'd made the trip for the wedding, pulled me aside. "I have to tell you something. 2 years ago, when you first came to me, I was worried. You were so paralyzed by fear, so unable to move forward. I honestly wondered if you'd ever get here. Here, married, happy, thriving. You've done remarkable work on yourself, Marcus." I had help, a lot of help. You did the work. You chose to trust instead of fear. That's all you, with God's grace. That night in our hotel room, Sarah and I lay in bed as husband and wife. "We did it," she said. "We did. Are you scared of our future?" I thought about it honestly. Sometimes, but not like I used to be, because I know God's already there, already in all our tomorrows. 2 weeks after the wedding, my dad had his surgery. It went well, and the doctors were optimistic about his recovery. I flew to Chicago to be there, and Sarah came with me. Sitting in that hospital waiting room, I felt grateful. Grateful that my dad had been at our wedding. Grateful that God had orchestrated the timing. Grateful that even in scary moments, I didn't have to be controlled by fear. My mum squeezed my hand. Thank you for moving your wedding. It meant everything to your father. I should have done it without hesitation. I'm glad we did. When my dad woke up from surgery, the first thing he said was, I got to see my son get married. Now I can rest. I laughed through tears. You're not resting yet, Dad. You've got years left. Back in New York, Sarah and I settled into married life. It was an adjustment, learning to share space fully, to make decisions together, to build something as a team. One evening, about a month after the wedding, we had our first real fight. About something stupid, how to load the dishwasher. But it escalated into bigger things, frustrations we'd both been holding. After we both cooled down, we sat on the couch to talk it through. I was terrified of this, I admitted, of having our first real fight. I kept thinking, what if we can't resolve conflicts? What if this is the beginning of falling apart? But we're sitting here talking it through. We're not falling apart. We're just figuring out how to be married. I know. But fear doesn't always make sense. Then let's make a rule. When fear starts talking, we call it out. We remind each other that God's already in our tomorrow. Deal? Deal. At work, the major project I'd pitched was moving forward. It was intense, demanding, and sometimes overwhelming. But I was learning to handle pressure differently. Not by trying to control everything, but by doing my best and trusting God with the outcomes. James, my colleague, noticed the change. You're different from when you started here. More relaxed somehow, even when things are crazy. I'm learning that stress doesn't require fear. I can work hard without being terrified of failing. Teach me that secret. It's not a secret. It's trust. I've learned to trust that God's already in whatever tomorrow brings, so I can be present in today, instead of being paralyzed by what might happen. One Sunday, Sarah and I visited a church in Brooklyn that several people had recommended. The sermon was about Abraham being called to leave everything familiar and go to a place he'd never been. Abraham didn't have GPS, the pastor said. He didn't have a map or a guarantee. He just had God's promise to go with him. And that was enough. I thought about my own journey, from Chicago to New York, from fear to faith, from paralysis to purpose. I'd taken so many steps without knowing exactly where they'd lead. But God had been with me in every one. After church, Sarah and I walked through the neighborhood. I love our life here, she said. I know it was scary to move, to start over, but I'm glad we did it. Me too. This is the life I was too afraid to choose, but it's the life I'm so glad I have. That night, I wrote in my journal, a year ago I was terrified of the future, paralyzed by what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. But God taught me something that changed everything. He's already in my tomorrow. He's already there, already holding it, already working it out. And that truth has given me freedom to live fully in today, to choose love over fear, to take risks, to build a life worth living. I looked over at Sarah, already asleep beside me, at Charlie curled up at the foot of our bed, at our small apartment that had become home, at the life we were building together, and I felt grateful, not just for the good things, but for the journey, for the fear that had driven me to my knees in that prayer garden, for the words God spoke that transformed everything. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. It was still true. Every day, every decision, every unknown future, God was already there. And I was learning day by day to really trust that, to really live like I believed it. A year into marriage, Sarah came home one evening with news that brought both joy and terror. I'm pregnant. I stared at her, processing. We talked about wanting kids someday, but someday had seemed safely in the future. Now it was here. Wow, that's amazing. You're scared, she said, reading my face. I'm terrified. What if I'm not ready? What if I'm a terrible father? What if... She put her hand over my mouth. Stop! We're going to do this together, and God's already in this baby's tomorrow. Remember? I pulled her close. You're right. I'm scared, but I'm also happy, really happy. The pregnancy brought up every fear I had about the future. What kind of father would I be? Could we afford a child in New York? What about Sarah's career? What about the million things that could go wrong? But I'd learned enough by now to recognize fear when it started talking, and I'd learned to talk back. My counselor helped me work through the anxiety. Marcus, you're never going to feel completely ready to be a parent. No one does. But you've spent years learning to trust God with uncertain futures. This is just another opportunity to practice that trust. At work, I told Diana about the pregnancy. Congratulations. How are you feeling about it? Honestly, scared, but excited. It's the biggest unknown I've faced. She laughed. Welcome to parenthood. It's terrifying and wonderful, but you'll be great at it. How do you know? Because you've learned to lead through uncertainty. You've learned to make decisions without having all the answers. Those are exactly the skills you need as a parent. Sarah's pregnancy wasn't easy. She had terrible morning sickness, exhaustion, and at 5 months, she was put on partial bed rest due to complications. I watched her struggle and felt helpless. This was a tomorrow I couldn't control, couldn't fix, could only trust God with. One night, she was crying from frustration and discomfort. I hate feeling so weak, so dependent. I held her hand. You're not weak. You're growing a human. You're doing the most incredible thing. I'm scared, Marcus. What if something goes wrong? It was strange being the one offering comfort instead of needing it. But I'd learned something over the past few years. The tomorrow that frightens us is already in God's hands. That's true for me, and it's true for you, and it's true for this baby. We can't control outcomes, but we can trust the one who holds them. She smiled through tears. When did you become so wise? I'm not wise. I just finally believe what God told me. We named our baby Grace, because grace was what had brought me to this point. Grace that had met me in my fear and taught me to trust. Grace was born on a snowy January morning after 20 hours of labor. When they placed her in my arms, I felt overwhelming love mixed with overwhelming terror. This tiny person depended on me. I was responsible for her life, her safety, her future. What if I failed her? But looking at her perfect little face, I heard those familiar words. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. God loved Grace even more than I did. He was already in all her tomorrows. I could trust him with her. The first few months of parenthood were brutal. Sleep deprivation, constant worry, the steep learning curve of caring for a newborn. Sarah and I stumbled through it together, learning as we went. One night at 3 a.m, I was walking a screaming Grace around the apartment, trying everything to calm her down. I was exhausted, frustrated, and starting to panic. What if something was wrong? What if I was doing everything wrong? What if I couldn't handle this? Then I stopped, took a breath, prayed. God, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm tired and scared and feel like I'm failing. But you're already in Grace's tomorrow. You're already in mine. Help me trust you with this moment. Grace calmed down almost immediately. Maybe coincidence, maybe God's gentle reminder that he was with us. Either way, I felt peace. At work, things were complicated. My major project was entering a critical phase right when Grace was born. I'd arranged for paternity leave, but the timing was difficult. Diana was understanding. Family comes first, Marcus. The project will be here when you get back. But I felt torn. I wanted to be home with Sarah and Grace, but I also felt responsible to my team, to the project, to my career. Sarah helped me process it. You can be a good father and a good architect. It's not either or, but you have to trust God to help you balance it. I took 2 months off, then transitioned back slowly. It wasn't perfect. There were days I felt like I was failing at everything, but I was learning that perfection wasn't the goal. Faithfulness was. When Grace was 6 months old, my dad's health declined again. The surgery had helped, but his heart was weak. My mom called one night with the news I'd been dreading. The doctors say it could be soon. You should come. I flew to Chicago the next day, leaving Sarah and Grace in New York. Sitting in my childhood home, watching my dad sleep in the hospital bed they'd set up in the living room, I felt the weight of grief coming. He woke up and saw me. Marcus, you came. Of course I came. And I want to tell you something. I'm proud of the man you've become, proud of the father you're going to be. You learned to be brave. That's the most important thing. Dad, don't talk like you're saying goodbye. Marcus, we all have our time. Mine is coming soon, and I'm at peace with it. I got to see you happy, married with a beautiful daughter. I got to see you become who you were meant to be. I held his hand, tears streaming down my face. I'm not ready to lose you. No one ever is. But God is already in your tomorrow, Marcus. Even the tomorrow where I'm not here. Trust him with it. My dad passed away 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep with my mom and me beside him. The grief was overwhelming. I'd prepared myself for years for various disasters and uncertainties, but nothing had prepared me for this, for the reality of a tomorrow where my father wasn't there. At the funeral, I gave the eulogy. I talked about his sacrifice, his wisdom, his quiet strength, and I talked about the last thing he'd told me, that God was already in my tomorrow, even the hard ones. My dad taught me to be brave, I said. Not by never being afraid, but by trusting God through the fear, by moving forward even when the path was uncertain. And his last gift to me was reminding me that even in grief, even in loss, God is already there, already holding our tomorrows. Sarah flew in with Grace for the funeral. Holding my daughter while grieving my father created this strange mix of sorrow and hope, life continuing even in loss. My mom was devastated but strong. Your father lived a good life. He died proud of his son. That is a blessing. Back in New York, I struggled with grief. It came in waves, moments where I'd forget and then remember, crushing weight followed by numbness. My counselor helped me process it. Grief is love with nowhere to go. Let yourself feel it. Don't try to control it or rush through it. I'd spent years learning to control my fear of the future. Now I had to learn to sit with pain in the present. Work became a welcome distraction. The project I'd led was completed and received recognition in several architecture publications. Diana promoted me to senior architect, giving me more responsibility and autonomy. But success felt different in the context of grief, less triumphant, more bittersweet. I wished my dad could have seen it. One evening I was working late when James stopped by my desk. Hey, I wanted to ask you something. My wife is pregnant, first kid, and I'm terrified. I see how you handle being a dad and having this demanding career, and I wonder, how do you do it without constantly freaking out? I thought about the question. Honestly, I do freak out sometimes, but I've learned that fear doesn't have to drive my decisions. I can acknowledge it and still move forward. How'd you learn that? I told him about the prayer garden, about hearing God's voice, about learning to trust. So it's a faith thing? It's a trust thing. I spent years trying to control the future through fear, but I finally learned that God's already in my tomorrow. I can't see it, but he can, and I can trust him with it. James was quiet for a moment. I'm not really a religious guy, but I could use some of that trust. The fear of becoming a father is eating me alive. Want to grab coffee sometime? I can share what I've learned. Over the next few months, James and I met regularly. I shared my journey with him, not as preaching, just as honest conversation about learning to trust through fear. He started asking questions about faith, about God, about how to find that kind of peace. I introduced him to my church, and he started attending. One day he texted me, "Remember when you told me God's already in your tomorrow? That's been changing how I think about everything. Thanks for being honest with me." At home, Grace was growing and changing every day. She started crawling, then pulling herself up, then taking her first steps. Each milestone brought joy and fear. She was becoming more independent, more vulnerable, more exposed to the world. Sarah and I had many late-night conversations about our fears as parents. "What if we mess her up?" Sarah asked one night. "We probably will sometimes. All parents do, but we'll also love her, support her, and point her toward God. That's all we can do." "When did you become so zen about parenting?" "I'm not zen. I'm just trying to remember that God loves Grace more than we do, and he's already in all her tomorrows. On Grace's first birthday, we had a small party at our apartment. My mom flew in, and several friends came over. Watching Grace smash her birthday cake, surrounded by people who loved her, I felt overwhelming gratitude. This life, the one I'd been too afraid to choose for so long, was the best thing that had ever happened to me. Marriage, fatherhood, a career I loved, a city that had become home, but I also felt my dad's absence. He should have been here, should have seen his granddaughter's first birthday. Later, after everyone left, I held Grace while she fell asleep. Sarah sat beside me. "You okay? I saw you get emotional during the party. I just wish my dad was here." "I know, but he did get to meet her. He got to see you become a father. That's a gift." She was right, and I was learning that grief and gratitude could exist simultaneously. That sorrow for what was lost and thankfulness for what remained weren't contradictory. That night, I wrote in my journal, "A year ago, my dad told me to trust God with the tomorrow where he wasn't here. I'm living in that tomorrow now. And it's hard. It hurts. But God is here just like he promised. He's in this grief. He's in Grace's laughter. He's in the life Sarah and I are building. The tomorrow I feared is here, and God's hands are still holding it, still holding me, still trustworthy." I thought about how far I'd come, from paralyzed by fear to living fully despite it, from avoiding commitment to being a husband and father, from seeing tomorrow as an enemy to seeing it as an invitation to trust. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more fears, more tomorrows I couldn't see or control, but I knew something now that I hadn't known before. God was already there, in every tomorrow, in every uncertainty, in every joy and every sorrow, and his hands were big enough to hold it all. 2 years after my dad's death, Diana called me into her office with an unexpected proposition. "Marcus, I'm retiring next year. The partners want to promote someone to principal architect, and you're the top candidate." I sat there stunned. Principal architect meant leading the entire firm, making major business decisions, representing the company to clients. I don't know what to say. "Say you'll think about it. It's a big responsibility, and it would change your life significantly. More travel, longer hours, higher stakes, but I believe you're ready for it." Walking out of her office, I felt the familiar flutter of fear mixed with excitement. This was the kind of opportunity I used to avoid because the responsibility felt too overwhelming. That evening, I talked it through with Sarah. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "Part of me wants it. It's an incredible opportunity, but part of me is terrified. What if I can't handle it? What if it means I'm never home? What if I fail?" Those are valid concerns. But there are also fears about tomorrow. What does your gut actually tell you about the opportunity itself? I thought about it. That it's the next step, that I've been preparing for this, that it scares me but also excites me. Then that's your answer. The fear doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's big. Over the next few weeks, I prayed about it, talked to mentors, and weighed the decision carefully. But this time, I wasn't paralyzed. I was thoughtful, intentional, and ultimately confident in my choice. I accepted the position. The transition would happen over the next year as Diana prepared to retire and trained me to take over. One Saturday morning, Grace, now almost 3, woke up early and climbed into bed with us. "Daddy, where does God live?" Sarah and I looked at each other, smiling at the randomness of toddler questions. "God lives everywhere, sweetheart. He's always with us. Even in tomorrow?" I felt a chill. "Especially in tomorrow." "How did you know to ask that?" "I don't know. I just wondered." After she wandered off to play, Sarah turned to me. "Out of the mouths of babes." "Yeah, God's been teaching me that lesson for years. Now apparently he's teaching it to my 3-year-old. That fall, James, who'd become not just a colleague but a close friend, asked if I'd consider leading a small group at church focused on faith and anxiety. "You've helped me so much," he said, "and I know there are other guys struggling with the same things. Constant fear of the future, paralysis about decisions, trying to control everything. I'd never considered leading anything at church, but the more I prayed about it, the more it felt right. We started with 6 guys, young professionals, all wrestling with anxiety about their futures, their careers, their relationships. Meeting every other week, we talked honestly about fear, about trust, about learning to believe God was already in our tomorrows. One guy, Tom, was particularly stuck. "I've been dating my girlfriend for 5 years. I know I should propose, but I'm terrified of making the wrong choice." I recognized myself in his fear. "Can I tell you something? I dated Sarah for 2 years before I could commit. I was so afraid of making a mistake that I almost lost her. But I finally learned that waiting for absolute certainty is just another form of fear. At some point, you have to choose. But how do you know it's the right choice? You don't. Not with certainty. But you can know if it's a good choice, if it aligns with your values, if it's who you want to become. And then you trust God with the outcome." 3 months later, Tom proposed. At the next group meeting, he was beaming. She said yes. And you know what? I'm still scared, but I'm doing it anyway, and that feels like growth. At work, the transition to principal was both challenging and rewarding. Diana was an excellent teacher, patient with my questions and generous with her wisdom. "You're going to make mistakes," she told me one day. "Everyone does in this role. The key is learning from them without letting fear of failure paralyze you." That used to be my biggest struggle. Fear of messing up kept me from trying anything. What changed? I told her about the prayer garden, about God's words, about the journey of learning to trust. "I'm not a religious person," she said, "but I respect faith that produces real transformation. Whatever you've been doing, it's working." One evening, Sarah came home from work looking troubled. "They're talking about restructuring my division. I might lose my job." I felt my protective instincts kick in, along with the old fear. But I caught myself. "How do you feel about it?" "Honestly, part of me is relieved. I've been thinking about making a change anyway. Maybe this is the push I need." "What would you want to do instead?" She'd been thinking about it. "Consulting. On my own terms. More flexibility, more control over my schedule, more time with Grace. That sounds amazing and scary. Very scary. But I keep thinking about what you've taught me, that God's already in that tomorrow. Whether I lose this job or keep it, He's there. He'll guide us." 2 months later, Sarah's job was eliminated. But instead of panicking, we saw it as an opportunity. She started her consulting business, working from home and setting her own hours. It was an adjustment financially, and there were moments of stress. But Sarah thrived in the independence, and having her home more was good for all of us. One afternoon, my mum called with news. She was selling the house in Chicago and moving to New York to be closer to us. "I'm getting older, Marcus. I want to be near my granddaughter, and this house has too many memories without your father." I helped her find an apartment in our neighborhood. Having her close brought comfort and joy. Grace got to see her grandmother regularly, and my mom had family nearby. But it also meant seeing her grief up close. 2 years later, she still missed my dad terribly. "Does it get easier?" I asked her one day. "It changes. The sharp pain becomes a dull ache, but I still miss him every day. Still wish I could tell him things, share things with him." "How do you keep going?" "The same way you learn to... I trust that God knows tomorrow. That He has good things ahead even though today is hard. Your father would want me to live fully, not just survive. So I try to do that." As Grace grew older, she started asking questions about death, about heaven, about where Grandpa went. "Is Grandpa in tomorrow?" she asked one day. "In a way, yes. He's in God's tomorrow, which is called eternity. And someday we'll see him again there." "Will you be in my tomorrow, Daddy?" The question hit me hard. I thought about all my tomorrows, the ones I'd feared, the ones I'd tried to control, the ones I'd learned to trust God with. "I hope so, sweetheart. But even if something happens and I'm not, God will always be in your tomorrow. He'll always take care of you." Sarah overheard the conversation. Later, she said, "You're teaching her young what it took you 30 years to learn." I want her to grow up trusting God with her future instead of being terrified of it like I was. At church, our men's group grew to 15 guys. We talked about careers, relationships, parenting, and always came back to the same core truth. God was already in whatever tomorrow we feared. One member, Carlos, shared a breakthrough. I've been afraid to start my own business for years. Too risky, too uncertain. But I realized I was letting fear make my decision instead of faith. So I'm doing it. I'm scared, but I'm doing it. The group celebrated with him, encouraging him, praying for him. And I felt grateful to be part of something bigger than myself, to see what God was doing in all these men's lives. When I officially became principal architect, the firm threw a celebration. My entire family was there. Sarah, Grace, my mom, Kevin, who flew in from Chicago. In my speech, I thanked Diana and the team, but I also shared something personal. 5 years ago, I was paralyzed by fear of the future. I turned down opportunities, avoided commitments, and let anxiety control my life. But I had a moment where God spoke to me and told me that the tomorrow I was so afraid of was already in His hands. That truth transformed everything. It gave me courage to take risks, to lead, to build a life worth living. And now I get to lead this firm into its own tomorrow. I don't know exactly what that will look like, but I know God's already there, and that's enough. After the celebration, James pulled me aside. You know what you've done. You've made it okay to be scared and still move forward, to have faith and still feel fear. That's revolutionary for guys like us who think we always have to have it together. That night, lying in bed, Sarah said, "I'm proud of you, not just for the promotion, but for the man you've become. I'm proud of us, of what we've built together. Are you scared of what comes next? Leading the firm, all that responsibility?" "Yeah, but I'm also excited. And I trust that God's already in that tomorrow, whether it's smooth or challenging." She kissed me. "That's my guy, the one who learned to trust." I thought about those words, the one who learned to trust. That's who I'd become. Not someone who never felt fear, but someone who'd learned to trust in spite of it. The tomorrow that used to terrify me was now my reality. I was living in the future I'd once been too afraid to choose, and it was better than I could have imagined. Not perfect, not easy, but full and rich and meaningful. And I knew that whatever tomorrow brought next, God was already there, already holding it, already working it out, and I could trust Him with it. 3 years into leading the firm, I faced a crisis that tested everything I'd learned about trust. The market crashed. Major clients pulled contracts. The firm's future became uncertain overnight. I sat in an emergency partners meeting, looking at the numbers. We had 3 months of operating capital. If we didn't land new clients soon, we'd have to lay people off, maybe even close. The old fear tried to rush in. "This is it. The disaster you've been waiting for. You're going to fail everyone." But I'd learned to recognize that voice. It wasn't truth. It was just fear. After the meeting, I called Sarah. "It's bad, really bad. I don't know if we can survive this. What are you going to do?" "Everything I can, and then trust God with the outcome." I assembled the team, all 42 employees. I was honest with them about the situation. Times are uncertain. We're facing challenges we haven't faced before. I can't promise everything will be okay, but I can promise I'll fight for this firm and for each of you. And I can promise I won't let fear drive my decisions. Over the next few weeks, I worked harder than I'd ever worked, reaching out to old contacts, pitching new clients, exploring every possible revenue stream. But I also carved out time to pray, to be present with my family, to trust instead of panic. One evening, Grace found me stressed at the kitchen table, buried in spreadsheets. "Daddy, why are you sad?" "I'm not sad, sweetheart, just worried about work." "Is God in your tomorrow?" Her simple question cut through all my complexity. Yes, He is." "Then why worry?" I pulled her onto my lap. "You're a very smart little girl. You're right. I shouldn't worry. I learned it from you, Daddy. You always say God is already there." Sarah was watching from the doorway, smiling. After Grace went to play, she said, "Your daughter just gave you your own sermon." "I know. I needed it." The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. An old client I'd worked with in Chicago called. He'd been following my career and heard about the firm's struggles. I have a massive project. Was going to go with a bigger firm, but I trust you. Interested? The contract was enough to sustain us for a year. We landed it, and the momentum brought in 2 more major clients. Within 3 months, we'd stabilized. Within 6 months, we were thriving again. At a company meeting, I addressed the team. I want to thank everyone for sticking with us through the uncertainty, and I want to share something personal. When this crisis hit, I had a choice. Let fear drive my decisions or trust God with the outcome. I chose trust. Not because I knew it would work out, but because I'd learned that God is faithful whether things work out the way I want or not. One of the junior architects, a woman named Rachel, came up afterward. Can I ask you something? How did you learn to trust like that? I'm constantly terrified about my future. I told her my story. About the prayer garden, about learning to trust, about the journey from paralysis to purpose. Would you be willing to share that with more people? Maybe write about it or speak about it. I think a lot of people need to hear that message. I'd never considered that. But the more I prayed about it, the more it felt like the next step. I started writing a blog about faith and fear, about learning to trust God with uncertain futures. It resonated with people. Within 6 months, I had thousands of readers. A publisher reached out. They wanted to turn my blog into a book. The idea terrified me, putting my story out there for everyone to see, being vulnerable on that scale. But Sarah encouraged me. This is your testimony. It's how God has worked in your life. People need to hear it. I spent the next year writing the book while leading the firm and being present for my family. It was intense, but I'd learned to handle intensity without being controlled by it. The book released to positive reviews. People reached out sharing how it had helped them, professionals paralyzed by career decisions, people afraid to commit to relationships, parents terrified of the future. One message in particular moved me. I've been too afraid to live for 20 years. Your book helped me understand that God's already in my tomorrow. I'm finally ready to start moving forward. Thank you. Churches started inviting me to speak. I'd stand in front of congregations and share my story, tell them about that night in the prayer garden, about the words God spoke that changed everything. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in God's hands, I'd say. You don't have to see the whole path. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to trust that God is already there, already working, already holding it all. After one speaking engagement, a young man approached me. I'm exactly where you were, paralyzed by fear, can't make decisions, missing out on life. How do I start changing? One choice at a time. Every time fear tries to drive your decision, pause. Acknowledge the fear, but choose to trust God anyway. It gets easier with practice. At home, Grace was now 7 and asking increasingly complex questions about faith and fear and the future. Daddy, are you ever still scared? All the time, sweetheart, but you don't let it stop you. I try not to. I've learned that being scared doesn't mean I have to let fear make my decisions. How did you learn that? God taught me. He told me He's already in my tomorrow, so I don't have to be afraid of it. She thought about it. I'm scared of growing up sometimes. What are you scared of? Getting older, things changing, not knowing what will happen. I pulled her close. I understand that fear. But here's what I know. God loves you so much, and He's already in all your tomorrows. All the days you'll grow up, all the changes that will come, all the things that will happen, He's already there, so you can trust Him with it. Will you help me remember that when I forget? Always. That's my job as your dad, to help you remember God's already in your tomorrow. Sarah and I celebrated 10 years of marriage. Looking back at who we'd been when we met versus who we were now felt surreal. Remember when you couldn't commit to anything? She said over our anniversary dinner. I was terrified of making the wrong choice. And now, I'm still terrified sometimes, but I've learned that perfect certainty isn't required for good choices. Faith is enough. I'm proud of who you've become. The husband, the father, the leader. None of that would have been possible if you'd stayed paralyzed by fear. I couldn't have done it without you. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That year, the men's group I led, had grown to 30 guys meeting in multiple locations. We'd trained other leaders, created resources, and seen hundreds of men learn to face their fears with faith. Tom, the guy who'd been terrified to propose years ago, was now married with 2 kids and leading his own group. Carlos's business had grown successfully. James had become a pastor. Seeing the ripple effect of what God had done in my life was humbling. My transformation hadn't just changed me, it had influenced dozens of others who were now influencing dozens more. One Sunday, I was asked to share my testimony at a large church in Manhattan. Over 2,000 people attended. I stood on that stage and told my story, about being paralyzed by fear, about that night in the prayer garden, about learning to trust, about how God had transformed my life. "I'm not special," I said. "I'm just someone who was desperate enough to listen when God spoke. And what he told me changed everything. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. If you're living in fear of the future, I want you to know, God is already there. You can trust him with it." After the service, dozens of people came up to share their own struggles with fear of the future. I prayed with them, encouraged them, and pointed them toward resources that could help. Driving home, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life, the one I'd been too afraid to choose for so long, had become a life of purpose and impact I never could have imagined. At work, the firm continued to thrive. We'd grown to 60 employees and were taking on increasingly ambitious projects. But I'd learned to lead without being driven by fear of failure. One of my partners asked how I stayed so calm under pressure. I learned that outcomes aren't entirely in my control. I can do excellent work, make wise decisions, and lead well. But I can't control everything, so I do my best and trust God with the results. That's a rare quality in leadership. Most people at your level are control freaks. I used to be. It was exhausting and ineffective. Trusting is better. That fall, Sarah and I got news that she was pregnant again. At first I felt the old fear trying to creep in, financial pressure, logistics, the challenges of 2 kids. But Grace's response put everything in perspective. "A baby. I'm going to be a big sister. This is the best news." Her pure joy reminded me that new life was a gift, not a problem to solve. God was already in this baby's tomorrow, just like he'd been in Grace's. "You okay?" Sarah asked, reading my face. "I'm great, scared but great, ready to trust God with another adventure." That night I wrote in my journal, 10 years ago I heard God tell me he was already in my tomorrow. I've tested that truth in countless situations, career changes, marriage, fatherhood, business crises, loss and growth. Every single time he's proven faithful, not because everything went perfectly, but because he was present in all of it. I'm living in tomorrows I used to fear, and they're better than I imagined. Not easier, but richer. Not problem-free, but full of purpose. And now another tomorrow is coming, a second child. I don't know what that will look like, but I know God's already there, and that's enough. Looking at Sarah sleeping beside me, at Grace's room down the hall, at the life we'd built together, I felt deep peace. The tomorrow that used to terrify me had become a today full of blessing, and tomorrow's tomorrow, God was already there too. I didn't need to see it to trust it. I'd learned that his hands were trustworthy, and they'd hold whatever came next. 15 years after that night in the prayer garden, I found myself back in Chicago, not to visit, but to speak at a conference for young professionals struggling with anxiety and fear about their futures. I stood backstage, preparing to go on, when I received a text from Sarah. "Grace just asked if you're nervous about speaking to so many people." I told her, "You probably are, but you trust God anyway." She said, "That's what Daddy always teaches. You're raising a girl who knows how to trust." "Love you." I smiled. Grace was 12 now, wise beyond her years, with a faith that humbled me, and her little brother, Daniel, named after my father, was 8, full of energy and questions. The moderator introduced me, and I walked onto the stage to face an audience of over 5,000 people. 10 years ago, this would have paralyzed me. But I'd learned that fear of tomorrow didn't have to control my today. I told my story, all of it. The paralyzing fear, the avoided opportunities, the relationship I almost lost, that desperate night in the prayer garden. I was 35 years old and completely controlled by fear of the future, I said. Every decision felt like it could lead to disaster. Every tomorrow felt like a threat. I was surviving, but I wasn't living. I shared about hearing God's voice, about those transformative words. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. That truth changed everything. Not because my life became easy, but because I learned I didn't have to have all the answers. I didn't have to see the whole path. I didn't have to control every outcome. I just had to trust that God was already in my tomorrow, already holding it, already working it out. I talked about moving to New York, about marriage, about fatherhood, about business crises and personal losses, about learning to lead, to risk, to live fully despite fear. Here's what I want you to know, I said, looking out at all those young faces. Your fear is real. Your anxiety about the future is valid, but it doesn't have to control you. God is already in whatever tomorrow you're afraid of. You can trust him with it. After my talk, the line of people wanting to share their stories stretched across the venue. I stayed for 3 hours, listening, praying, encouraging. One young woman, probably mid-20s, told me through tears, "I've been too afraid to pursue my dreams for 5 years, too afraid of failing, too afraid of the unknown. But hearing your story made me realize I'm wasting my life being scared of tomorrow. It's time to start trusting instead." An older man, maybe 60, said, "I thought I was too old to change, too set in my fearful ways. But if you could transform at 35, maybe I can transform at 60. These conversations reminded me why I'd written the book, why I spoke at events, why I shared my story. People needed to know that change was possible, that fear didn't have to be permanent, that God was trustworthy. That evening, I met Kevin for dinner. We hadn't seen each other in person for over a year. "Look at you," he said. "International speaker, best-selling author, successful architect. Remember when you couldn't commit to dinner plans?" I laughed. "I remember. I was a mess. You were human. You just hadn't learned to trust yet. You helped with that. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That's what friends do. But you did the work, Marcus. You chose to trust even when it was terrifying." We talked about his business, my firm, our families. And I realized how much had changed since those early days in Chicago when I'd been paralyzed by fear. "Can I tell you something?" Kevin said. "Watching your transformation has impacted me too. I've always been pretty confident, but seeing you learn to trust God so deeply has challenged me to trust him more with my own uncertainties." The next day, I visited my old church, the one with the prayer garden where everything changed. I sat on that same bench where I'd heard God speak 15 years ago. The garden looked the same, but I was completely different. I pulled out my journal and wrote, 15 years ago, I sat on this bench terrified of tomorrow. God spoke words that changed my life. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. I've tested that truth in every possible way. Career changes, marriage, children, business crises, loss, success, failure, joy, grief, all of it. And in every situation, every circumstance, every tomorrow I feared, God was already there. He's never failed me. Not once. I continued. I'm 48 now, Grace is 12, Daniel is 8. Sarah and I have been married 13 years. I've led the firm for 12 years. I've written 3 books. I've spoken to thousands of people. I've helped hundreds of men learn to face their fears with faith. And none of it would have been possible if I'd stayed controlled by fear of tomorrow. I sat there in that sacred space, grateful for the journey, for the fear that drove me to my knees, for the words God spoke, for every step of trust that followed. My phone rang. It was Sarah. "Hey, wanted to check in. How's Chicago?" "Good. I'm at the prayer garden, the one where it all started. Yeah, just sitting here remembering, being grateful. I'm grateful too, for the man you've become, for the life we've built, for everything God's done." After we hung up, I closed my eyes and prayed. "God, thank you. Thank you for speaking to me that night. Thank you for being patient as I learned to trust. Thank you for being in every tomorrow I feared. Thank you for proving your faithfulness over and over again. I felt his presence, that same gentle assurance I'd felt 15 years ago, and I heard those familiar words one more time. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. I know, I whispered. I finally really believe it. Flying back to New York, I thought about what tomorrow might bring. Challenges with the firm, raising teenagers, aging, health issues, all the unknowns that still existed, and I felt peace. Not because I knew what would happen, but because I knew who held what would happen. At home, Grace and Daniel ran to greet me. Sarah hugged me, and Charlie, now grey around the muzzle but still energetic, wagged his entire body with excitement. "How was the trip?" Sarah asked. "Really good, powerful, a lot of people resonating with the message." That evening, Grace asked if we could talk. We sat on her bed, and she seemed nervous. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" "I'm scared about starting middle school next year. Everything is going to change, and I don't know what it'll be like." I recognize that fear immediately. Fear of unknown tomorrows. That's a normal fear. Change is scary. But can I tell you something? What? God is already in your middle school tomorrow. He's already there. Already knows what it'll be like. Already knows what you'll need. You don't have to see it or control it. You just have to trust that he's there. Like you learned to trust? Exactly like that. And you know what? I'll be here to remind you when you forget. That's what dads are for. She hugged me. "Thanks, Daddy. I'll try to remember." Later, Sarah and I stood in the doorway watching our kids sleep. "They're growing up so fast," she said. "I know. Sometimes it terrifies me. All the tomorrows I can't control for them. But God's already in those tomorrows too. For them, for us, for all of it. I know. I just have to keep choosing to trust instead of fear." The next week, I led the men's group. We had a new guy, Andrew, who reminded me so much of my younger self, paralyzed by fear, unable to make decisions, missing out on life. "I don't know how to stop being afraid," he said. "I don't think the goal is to stop being afraid," I told him. "The goal is to stop letting fear drive your decisions, to acknowledge it, and trust God anyway." How do I do that? Practice. Every time fear tries to make a decision for you, pause, acknowledge the fear, but choose to trust God instead. It gets easier the more you do it. Over the following months, I watched Andrew begin to transform. Small decisions at first, accepting a social invitation despite anxiety, having a difficult conversation he'd been avoiding, taking on a project at work that stretched him. "It's working," he told the group one night. "I'm still scared most of the time, but I'm not paralyzed anymore. I'm actually living." That's what transformation looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of trust, stronger than the fear. At work, we took on our most ambitious project yet, designing a sustainable city development that would serve as a model for future urban planning. It was massive, complex, and carried significant risk. In the partners' meeting, when concerns were raised about the risk level, I shared my perspective. Every significant achievement requires risk. We can play it safe and stay small, or we can trust our abilities, do excellent work, and step into something bigger. I vote we take the risk. The partners agreed, and I realized how far I'd come. From the guy who avoided all risk to the leader who understood that calculated risk was necessary for growth. One Sunday, my pastor asked if I'd share briefly during the service. I stood before my church community and told them about my journey. 15 years ago, God spoke to me in a prayer garden and told me that the tomorrow I was so afraid of was already in His hands. I'm standing here today as living proof that God is faithful to that promise. Every tomorrow I feared, He was already there. Every decision I was too afraid to make, He gave me courage to make. Every step I was too terrified to take, He guided me through. I paused, looking at the faces before me. If you're living in fear of tomorrow, I want you to know, God is already there. You can trust him with it. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to see the whole path. You just need to trust that the one who holds tomorrow is trustworthy, and he is. He absolutely is. After the service, dozens of people thanked me for sharing, but one conversation stood out. An elderly woman, probably in her 80s, grabbed my hand. I've been a Christian for 60 years. But I've still lived most of my life controlled by fear of tomorrow. Today, hearing your story, I realized I've been missing out. Even at 83, it's not too late to start trusting instead of fearing. Driving home, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. God had taken my struggle and turned it into a testimony that was helping people of all ages, all backgrounds, all situations. That night, I updated my journal one last time. 15 years after God spoke to me, I'm living in tomorrows I once feared. I'm married to Sarah. We have 2 incredible kids. I lead a successful firm. I've written books that have helped thousands. I've spoken to tens of thousands. I've mentored hundreds of men, and all of it exists because I learned to trust that God was already in my tomorrow. I continued, the journey isn't over. There will be more tomorrows to face, more fears to overcome, more opportunities to trust. But I know something now that I didn't know before. God is faithful. His hands are trustworthy. And the tomorrow that frightens me is always already in his hands. I closed the journal and walked to the window. New York spread out below me, millions of lights in the darkness. Somewhere in this city, someone was probably sitting in fear of tomorrow, paralyzed by uncertainty, unable to move forward. I prayed for them, for everyone who needed to hear those words. God had spoken to me. The tomorrow that frightens you is already in my hands. It was true. I'd proven it in my own life, and I'd spend whatever time I had left helping others discover it too. Because that truth, that simple, profound, life-transforming truth, changed everything. God was already in tomorrow, already holding it, already working it out, and we could trust him with it, all of it. Every fear, every uncertainty, every unknown future. His hands were big enough, strong enough, trustworthy enough. They always had been, they always would be. This was my story, my testimony, my life transformed by learning to trust. And it was an invitation to anyone who needed it. The tomorrow you fear is already in God's hands. You can trust him with it. Take the step. Make the choice. Live the life. God's already there, waiting for you in your tomorrow, and his hands are trustworthy.